I learned the truth about my own family while standing quietly in a hallway. I was not trying to listen. I was not hiding. I was simply carrying a tray of tea, walking toward a door I had knocked on 100 times before. But that night, the door was closed, and the words behind it stopped me cold. I heard my name, not spoken with love, not spoken with concern, but spoken like I was a problem that needed to be discussed. I remember gripping the tray harder than I needed to. The cups rattled slightly. The tea was already cooling, but I did not notice. When you hear something like that, your body reacts before your mind does. Your chest tightens. Your ears ring. Time slows down in a strange, uncomfortable way. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to pretend I had not heard anything, but I stayed, and that choice changed how I saw everything that came before it. That evening had started like so many others. Quiet, ordinary, safe. Rain tapped against the windows. The house smelled faintly of dinner and clean laundry. The lights were low, warm, familiar. This was my home, or at least, I believed it was. I had lived there for years. I had raised my child there. I had shared laughter, grief, and countless small moments within those walls. I trusted the people inside that house completely. That was my mistake, because trust, I learned too late, can sometimes make you blind. My name is Claire. I have always been the kind of person who puts family first. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, in the way I show up every day. I believed in patience, in listening more than speaking, in giving people space to grow, even when it meant stepping back myself. I married my husband, Daniel, when we were both still learning who we were. We built our life slowly, not perfectly, but honestly. We worked hard. We saved when we could. We argued sometimes, but we always found our way back to each other. And then we had our son, Ethan. From the moment I held him, my world changed. Everything became about keeping him safe, helping him grow, making sure he felt loved. I stayed up late when he was sick. I packed lunches before sunrise. I listened to his worries when he was too young to understand them himself. Years passed the way they always do, quietly, then all at once. Ethan grew taller, more independent, more confident, and one day, he told me he had met someone special. Her name was Lily. When I first met her, she was polite and warm. She smiled easily. She spoke with care. She thanked me for dinner, asked about my day, listened when I spoke. I liked her. I truly did. When they married and decided to stay with me for a while, it felt natural. The house was big enough, and after Daniel passed away, I welcomed the company. Losing my husband had left a quiet emptiness behind, the kind that does not scream, but settles into corners. Having them there made the house feel alive again. At first, everything felt balanced. We shared meals. We talked in the evenings. We respected each other's space. I made an effort not to interfere. I did not offer advice unless asked. I reminded myself that this was their life, their marriage. Still, I remained the one who remembered things. Appointments, house repairs, birthdays. I cooked most of the meals, cleaned without complaint, adjusted my routines to fit theirs. Not because I was asked to, but because I wanted peace. And for a while, peace seemed possible. Visual cue, morning light in kitchen, quiet routine. But slowly, almost invisibly, things began to change. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Plans were discussed after I had gone to bed. Small decisions were made without including me. Nothing cruel, nothing obvious, just enough to make me feel slightly out of place. I told myself I was overthinking, that this was just part of living with adult children. I reminded myself to be grateful, to be understanding. After all, they had their own lives now. Then came the small comments. You don't have to worry about that anymore. We already handled it. Words that sounded helpful, but landed strangely. I noticed Lily reorganizing the kitchen, moving things I had used the same way for years. I did not object. I smiled and adapted. I noticed Ethan becoming quieter around me, more distant, always busy. I told myself he was tired, that work was stressful. I never imagined anything was wrong between us. Why would I? I trusted them completely. Scene transition, evening, hallway shadows. That night, I had made tea for all of us, like I always did. It was a habit, a small way of showing care. I carried the tray down the hallway, toward their bedroom. Their door was closed. I lifted my hand to knock, and then I heard my name. Lily's voice was calm, too calm. She doesn't realize how much this affects us. Then Ethan spoke. I know, but what are we supposed to do? My heart dropped. I did not move. I did not breathe. I stood there, holding the tray, listening to the people I love talk about me as if I were not just outside the door, as if I were not part of the family anymore. I do not remember every word they said, but I remember how it made me feel small, unwanted, replaceable. And in that hallway, I understood something painful. The home I thought was mine had already begun to let me go. I stood outside their door longer than I should have. The hallway light buzzed faintly above me. The tray felt heavier in my hands with every second. I told myself I should leave, that listening was wrong. But I did not leave. I stayed just long enough to understand that the conversation was about me, and not in the way I had always believed. They were not angry. They were not shouting. Their voices were calm, careful, and somehow that made it hurt more. I heard Lily say quietly, "It's just, everything revolves around her needs." There was a pause. Ethan answered softly, "She's been through a lot." Another pause, longer this time. "I know," Lily replied, "but we have our own life too." That was enough. I stepped back before I heard more, not because I wanted to protect them, but because I needed to protect myself. I carried the tray back to the kitchen. I poured the tea into the sink without tasting it. Watched the steam fade into nothing. Listened to the quiet house as if it had suddenly become unfamiliar. That night, I did not confront them. I did not ask questions. Instead, I went to bed early and stared at the ceiling, replaying those words over and over. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe I had truly become a burden without realizing it. Doubt is powerful. It convinces you to question your own feelings. Morning came, and I behaved as I always did. Breakfast prepared, coffee ready, calm smile in place. They greeted me normally. No tension, no awkwardness. If they felt guilty, they hid it well. And I said nothing, because sometimes silence feels safer than hearing confirmation of your fears. Days passed, then weeks. I began noticing things more carefully, not searching, just observing. Ethan and Lily spent more time discussing plans privately, financial decisions, travel ideas, changes around the house. I learned about many of them after they were already decided. One afternoon, Lily mentioned casually, "We're thinking of converting the guest room into an office." I nodded slowly. "That sounds useful." It was only later I realized she meant the room where I kept many of Daniel's things stored. Boxes of memories, photographs, old letters. They were not being cruel. They were being practical. Still, I felt something inside me. That evening, I opened those boxes alone. I touched the photographs, ran my fingers over familiar faces, frozen in time. Grief returned quietly, mixing with something new. Displacement. The world moves forward, even when you are not ready. I told myself this was natural, healthy even. But understanding something does not always remove the ache. Another small moment came weeks later. I overheard laughter from the living room while I folded laundry upstairs. When I came down, the conversation stopped. Ethan smiled. Lily smiled. But the air shifted. I asked, "What were you talking about?" "Oh, nothing important," Ethan said. And perhaps it truly was nothing. Yet I felt outside of something I could not see. I began adjusting my behavior. I spoke less, stayed in my room more often, tried not to interrupt their routines. I thought giving space might bring us closer again. Instead, distance settled more firmly. One evening, Lily said kindly, "You don't have to cook every night. We can handle it." I smiled. "I enjoy it." But I stepped back anyway. Another small piece of my role disappeared. These were not dramatic changes. They were gentle, polite, almost invisible, and that is why they were so difficult to address. "Mom, we've been thinking about reorganizing some shared spaces." His voice was careful. "Consider it." I folded my hands in my lap. "All right," he continued. "We just want the house to work better for everyone." The words were reasonable, logical. Still, they landed with weight. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. He explained changes to storage areas, furniture placement, use of rooms. Nothing unreasonable, nothing unkind. Yet with every suggestion, I felt something subtle shifting. Ownership becoming shared in ways it never had been before. I agreed to everything, because what else could I do? Harmony mattered more to me than control. That weekend, we reorganized together. I sorted through belongings, decided what to keep, what to store, what to donate. Some objects carried memories I could not explain out loud, but I smiled and let them go. At one point, Lily said warmly, "You're being so flexible about this." I answered softly, "It's your home too." The words were sincere, yet saying them aloud felt like placing distance between my past and present. Because once spoken, they changed how I saw the space around me. It was no longer just the home I built. It was something evolving beyond me. Another shift came weeks later. Dinner conversations grew shorter. Schedules rarely aligned. Ethan worked late. Lily had commitments of her own. We still shared meals sometimes, but they felt more structured than spontaneous. One night, while clearing dishes, Lily said gently, "We've been thinking about long-term goals." I kept my focus on the sink. "That's good," she continued. "We want to make sure we're planning responsibly for the future." I nodded again, and then she added, "For everyone involved." Those words lingered. They were meant kindly. I know they were. Still, something about them made my chest feel tight. Because I could not tell whether I was part of that future, or simply a factor within it. That night I sat alone in the living room long after they went to bed. The clock ticked steadily. The house creaked in familiar ways. I thought about the years behind us, how natural closeness once felt, how unquestioned belonging used to be. And I realized something quietly painful. Relationships do not always fracture loudly. Sometimes they stretch slowly until the shape of them changes completely. No one intends harm. No one raises their voice. But distance grows all the same. The moment that truly unsettled me came unexpectedly. I returned home early from an errand. Voices drifted from the kitchen. I paused, not to listen, but because I heard my name again. Ethan sounded thoughtful. "I just want her to feel secure." Lily replied, "I understand, but we also have to think realistically." My heartbeat quickened. They weren't speaking harshly. They weren't upset. They were discussing logistics, plans, possibilities, and I suddenly realized something with startling clarity. There was nothing obvious to confront, no single moment to point to, just a gradual feeling of becoming less necessary. Months passed. One night, I overheard them again, not intentionally, just passing by. Lily's voice carried through the hallway. "We need to talk about long-term plans." Ethan sighed. "I know." Then she said something that stayed with me. "This house, it can't stay this way forever." My footsteps slowed. Ethan asked, "What are you suggesting?" "I'm saying we should think about what's best for everyone." The conversation lowered after that. I could not hear clearly, but I did not need to. The message had already settled in my chest. I returned to my room quietly, sat on the edge of my bed, and for the first time, I allowed myself to ask a painful question. Had I mistaken presence for permanence? Had I believed love guaranteed belonging? From that night on, something changed inside me. I was still kind, still supportive, but I was also watchful. I listened more closely, not out of suspicion, but awareness. Because once trust cracks, even slightly, you begin seeing things differently. You notice tone, timing, glances exchanged between others. And deep down, you start preparing for a truth you are not yet ready to face. I did not know then what was coming. I did not know how direct the conversation would become, or how calmly it would be delivered. But I could feel it approaching, like distant thunder before a storm. And I sensed that the words I heard outside that door were only the beginning. After that night, I began to move through the house differently. Nothing visible changed on the outside. I still greeted Ethan and Lily with warmth. I still asked about their days. But internally, I had become quieter, more observant, more careful with my expectations. I stopped assuming I understood my place. One morning, I noticed Lily reviewing papers at the dining table. Spreadsheets, notes, printed forms. I poured my coffee and sat nearby, working on something important. I asked. She hesitated, just briefly. "Oh, just organizing finances." I nodded and did not press further, but I could feel the boundary. Not unkind, just firm. Later that day, Ethan mentioned they were meeting with someone about future planning. He spoke casually, like it was routine. I smiled. "That sounds responsible." He smiled back, but he did not invite me into the conversation, and I did not ask to be included. That was the pattern now. Mutual politeness, increasing distance. I began filling my time differently, reading more, walking in the evenings, calling old friends I had not spoken to in years. Part of it was healthy, rediscovering independence, but part of it came from a quieter realization. I was learning how to exist without expecting their attention, because attention, once given freely, now felt measured, and I did not want to ask for something that might feel like an obligation. One evening, Ethan approached me gently. My future was being considered in conversations I was not part of. I stepped inside deliberately so they would know I was there. They greeted me normally, smiles, casual conversation, and again, I chose silence. But inside, uncertainty had taken root. From that point forward, every small interaction carried new meaning. Kindness remained. Respect remained, yet I could feel preparation happening beneath the surface, like furniture being rearranged before a major change. I did not know exactly what they intended, but I sensed something approaching, something that would require a conversation none of us had yet begun. And though I tried to remain calm, patient, understanding, I could not ignore the quiet question growing inside me. Was I still at the center of this family, or was I slowly being moved to its edge? The conversation I had been quietly preparing myself for arrived on a calm Sunday afternoon. There was nothing dramatic about it, no raised voices, no tension in the air beforehand, just Ethan asking gently, "Mom, can we sit and talk for a bit?" I knew then, not what he would say exactly, But I knew this was the moment everything I had sensed would finally take shape. We sat at the dining table, the same table where birthdays had been celebrated, homework had been done, and laughter had once filled the room. Lily joined us, her expression kind but serious. The sunlight through the window felt warmer than usual, almost out of place. Ethan folded his hands. "We want to talk about the future," he said. I nodded. "All right," he continued slowly, choosing his words with care. "You've done so much for me, for both of us, and we're grateful." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." Then came the pause, the kind that carries weight. Lily spoke next. "We've been thinking about living arrangements long term." The room felt very still. I kept my voice calm. "What are you thinking?" Ethan inhaled quietly. "We believe it might be healthier for everyone if we started transitioning toward more independence." There it was. Not rejection, not cruelty, but change. I asked gently, "You mean moving out?" He hesitated. "Not exactly. We were thinking, maybe exploring options where you could have your own space, somewhere comfortable." The words landed softly, but their meaning was unmistakable. For a moment I said nothing, not because I was angry, not because I was shocked, but because I could feel years of assumptions shifting inside me. This had been my home, my center, my place of belonging, and now I was being invited, kindly, to imagine myself elsewhere. Lily reached forward slightly. "We want you to be happy, independent, not feeling tied down to our routines." Her intention was genuine. I could see that. Yet intentions do not always soften impact. I asked one quiet question. "Is this something you both want?" Ethan answered immediately. "We think it would be best. Not demanded, not forced, just best." I nodded slowly. It was natural, reasonable, even healthy. Still, understanding does not prevent grief. That night I sat in my room reflecting. I did not cry. I did not feel anger. Instead, I felt something more complex. A quiet mourning for the version of life I had believed would continue unchanged. I realized I had tied my identity too closely to my role within that home. Mother, caregiver, constant presence. And now that role was evolving, not disappearing, but reshaping. Over the following weeks, conversations continued. We explored possibilities together. Apartments nearby, small homes, communities designed for comfort and ease. They approached it thoughtfully, respectfully, and I participated with calm cooperation. But inside, I was processing something deeper than logistics. I was learning to separate love from proximity, family from shared walls, belonging from location. One afternoon, while viewing a small bright apartment, Ethan asked softly, "What do you think?" I looked around. Sunlight through wide windows, quiet street below, simple space. "It's peaceful," I said. And I meant it, because peace, I realized, might not look the way I had always imagined. Sometimes peace requires letting go of familiarity. Sometimes it asks you to trust yourself again. The day I signed the lease felt strangely calm. No drama, no resistance, just acceptance. Boxes were packed gradually, memories sorted gently. We worked together, and through it all, I noticed something important. Distance had not erased love. It had simply revealed how much of my identity I needed to rebuild independently. The night before my move, I walked through the house quietly, touched walls, paused in familiar rooms, not to hold on to them, but to thank them, because endings are not always losses. Sometimes they are transitions waiting to teach you who you are beyond your roles. And though my heart was tender, it was also ready. Moving day arrived without ceremony. No rushing, No arguments, just a series of quiet tasks done carefully, as if we were afraid to disturb something fragile. Boxes lined the hallway. Some were labeled clearly, others simply said personal. Ethan carried the heavier ones. Lily organized items gently, asking before touching anything that felt important. I watched more than I directed, because part of me already understood. This was something I needed to walk through mostly on my own. When the final box was placed in the car, I stood for a moment at the front door. The house looked the same, yet it no longer felt like mine in the same way. Ethan hugged me. "You can come by any time," he said. I smiled. I know, and I believed him. Lily hugged me too. "We'll visit often," she added. "I'd like that," I replied. There were no promises made out of guilt, only simple truths offered with care. The drive to my new place was quiet. I watched familiar streets pass by, stores I had known for years, corners tied to memories that would now belong to a different chapter. The apartment was small, but bright. Sunlight filled the living room. The kitchen was simple. Everything felt manageable. I unpacked slowly, not because there was too much, but because each item carried meaning. A framed photo here, a book placed deliberately there. With every small decision, I felt something steady return. Ownership, not of space alone, but of my time, my rhythm, my quiet. That first night, I cooked for myself. Nothing fancy, just something warm and familiar. I ate at the small table and listened to the silence. Not the heavy silence of loss, but the gentle kind that waits patiently for you to speak first. The days that followed were strange but peaceful. I created new routines. Morning walks, afternoon reading, evenings spent writing or simply thinking. I called friends I had lost touch with, reconnected without explaining too much. Because some things do not need explanation. They simply need space. Ethan and Lily visited the first weekend. They brought food. We talked easily. There was warmth. There was care. But there was also a new boundary. Healthy, clear, respectful. And for the first time in a long while, I felt relief. Because I was no longer trying to fit myself into a space that was slowly changing shape. One evening, weeks later, I finally allowed myself to revisit the moment that had started everything. The words I overheard. They don't realize how much this affects us. We have our own life too. At first, I had heard rejection in those words. Now, with distance, I heard something else. Honesty, not cruelty. Not betrayal, just to people trying to protect their marriage, while caring about someone they loved. The pain had come not from what was said, but from my own assumptions. I had assumed permanence where change was natural. I had assumed closeness meant sameness. And I had assumed love meant never needing space. None of those things were true. I realized something important. I had been living in the past while expecting the future to look the same. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. Because growth does not stop when your children grow up. It simply changes direction. One night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been honest. Because sometimes the most loving thing people can do is tell the truth quietly, before resentment takes root. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is listen, even when it hurts. Healing didn't come all at once. It was slow, like the soft light of dawn gradually pushing away night. Some days were easier, others were quiet battles I fought alone. I learned to sit with my feelings, the sadness, the loneliness, the confusion, without letting them consume me. I began to understand that grief doesn't always come from loss alone. Sometimes it's the loss of what we imagined would be. I spent more time reflecting on who I was beyond my role as a mother or caregiver. Who was I when I wasn't defined by my family's needs? I discovered old hobbies I had set aside, books I wanted to read, places I wanted to explore. These small rediscoveries reminded me that I was still whole, still worthy, still capable, still growing. I also realized forgiveness was part of healing, not just forgiving others, but forgiving myself for the expectations I had held, for the times I stayed silent when I should have spoken, for the times I wished things were different instead of accepting what was. One afternoon, I wrote a letter, not to send, just for me. I wrote to Ethan and Lily to thank them for their honesty, to acknowledge the pain we all shared, to express hope for a future where love could look different, but remain true. I never gave them that letter, but writing it helped me say aloud what I felt inside. That love is not a fixed shape. It can bend, stretch, change, and still be real. I spoke to Ethan again one day, not about plans or logistics, just about us. "I want you to know I love you," I said. He smiled warmly. "I love you too, Mom, always." Those words felt like a balm. Simple, honest, healing. As time passed, I redefined what family meant to me. It was not just the people living under the same roof. It was the bonds of care, respect, and understanding. Whether near or far, whether present or absent, I accepted that my family was evolving. That was okay, because love, real love, allows space to grow. And in giving that space, I found strength I didn't know I had. Starting over isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to carry what matters with you and letting go of what holds you back. After settling into my new place, I realized that building a life alone was not a punishment. It was a chance, a fresh beginning. The first morning I woke up in my apartment without anyone else around, I felt a mix of emotions. There was a quietness that was unfamiliar, no footsteps in the hall, no sounds of the coffee machine in the kitchen. But alongside that silence was a new kind of freedom. I could wake up on my own schedule, make my own breakfast without worrying if it suited someone else's taste, play the music I wanted to hear. It was strange at first, but it was mine. I started creating routines that made me feel grounded. Mornings began with slow stretches by the window. I watched the world outside, waking up the early birds flitting about, neighbors walking dogs, cars starting their daily rhythm. Then I would sit with a cup of tea, sometimes journaling, sometimes just watching the sunlight move across the room. It was a small ritual, but it reminded me that I belonged to myself, first and foremost. The afternoons were often spent exploring the neighborhood. I walked down quiet streets lined with trees, past small cafes and shops I hadn't noticed before. Slowly, I began to recognize familiar faces, people who smiled as I passed by, shopkeepers who greeted me by name. One day, I found a small community garden tucked between two apartment buildings. It was a peaceful oasis, rows of flowers, herbs, and vegetables tended by hands I had yet to meet. I asked if I could help. They welcomed me with open arms. Tending the garden became a new kind of therapy. Digging my hands into the earth, watching life grow from tiny seeds, sharing stories with others who cared for the space. For the first time in a long while, I felt connected, not to a family defined by blood or history, but to a community chosen by kindness. One woman named Marissa became a close friend. She was a widow like me, with 2 grown children living far away. We shared afternoons drinking lemonade on a bench, talking about everything and nothing. She listened without judgment. She understood the strange loneliness of starting over. With her support, I began to rebuild more than just my daily routine. I began to rebuild my confidence. Little by little, I took steps outside my comfort zone. I signed up for a local art class, something I had always wanted to try but never made time for. At first, I was nervous. Would I be good enough? Would anyone want to be my friend? But I found joy in the simple act of creating. The soft scratch of pencil on paper, the swirl of colors mixing on canvas. Each stroke was a small victory, a reminder that I was capable of growth. Social events followed. Community potlucks, book clubs, walking groups. With every new face, I felt the walls around me soften. I wasn't replacing my family. I was expanding what family meant. People who choose to care. People who listen. People who show up. Sometimes the most unexpected friendships become the ones that heal the deepest wounds. At home, I learned to enjoy my own company. I cooked meals slowly and deliberately, tried new recipes, sometimes with success, sometimes with laughter at mistakes. I set the table for one, lighting a candle and savoring the quiet moments. There was a peace in that solitude I had never known. But new beginnings aren't without their challenges. Loneliness crept in sometimes, especially on quiet evenings. I missed the familiar sounds of my son's voice. I missed the routines we had shared. Yet even in those moments, I reminded myself, loneliness is not the same as being alone. I could be alone and still whole. I found strength in that comma. One afternoon, Ethan called. We spoke for a long time. He told me about his work, about Lily's new project, about the garden they had planted in their own backyard. I told him about my art class, about the garden I had joined, about Marissa. Our conversation was full of warmth and honesty. Neither of us tried to pretend that things were the same as before, but we accepted the new ways we loved each other. That night, after we hung up, I sat by the window looking at the stars. I thought about all the changes, the endings, and the beginnings, and I realized something important. Life is not about holding on to what was. It's about embracing what can be. Forgiveness is not a sudden act. It is a quiet journey, sometimes gentle, sometimes difficult, always necessary. For a long time, I held onto a small ache inside, a mixture of hurt and confusion. I wondered why things had changed, why the family I thought I knew felt so distant, why words spoken behind a closed door had echoed louder than any spoken directly to me. It took time to realize that forgiveness was not about forgetting or excusing. It was about freeing myself from carrying the weight of pain. I began by forgiving Ethan and Lily, not because they were perfect, not because everything was easy, but because holding on to resentment only kept me tethered to the past. I told myself, they made choices out of love. Love that was complicated, messy, and sometimes flawed. They were trying to protect their own marriage, their own lives, their own hopes, and in doing so, they had hurt me unintentionally. That hurt was real, and it mattered, but it did not have to define the whole story. Then I turned the forgiveness inward. I forgave myself for the expectations I had held so tightly, for the times I wished things were different instead of accepting them as they were, for the moments I doubted my own worth. I learned that forgiveness begins when we stop blaming ourselves for what is beyond our control. It begins when we recognize that love, even at its best, is not flawless. It is human, it is imperfect, and it asks us to be patient with others and with ourselves. In those moments of reflection, I discovered peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind of peace that arises from understanding, from acceptance, from the quiet strength that comes with letting go. I thought often about what family truly means. Is it proximity? Is it shared history? Is it agreement or harmony? Or is it something deeper, a commitment to care, even when distance grows, a willingness to forgive, even when hurt runs deep? an openness to love, even when it looks different than we imagined. I realized that love does not always keep us physically close. Sometimes love means giving space to grow, allowing others to find their own way even when it leads away from us. That kind of love is brave. It requires vulnerability. It requires trust. It requires faith that bonds are not broken simply because they are stretched. With forgiveness came a new clarity. I no longer saw myself as a victim of circumstance. I saw myself as a survivor of change, a woman who had faced loss and found strength, a mother who loved fiercely and learned to love differently, a person who had been heard, even in silence. Hope is not always loud. It doesn't always arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. Often, it settles quietly, like a gentle light in the darkest room. For me, hope came slowly, not as a sudden feeling, but as a series of small moments, each one building on the last. I found it in the way the morning sunlight warmed my face when I sat by the window, in the laughter shared with new friends in the garden, in the soft rhythm of my own breath during moments of calm. Hope grew when I realized that my story was not over, that endings were really beginnings in disguise. I could choose how to write the next chapters. No longer bound by the past, I was free to dream. Some days, hope was fragile like a bird just learning to fly. I worried about the loneliness that crept in during quiet evenings. I wondered if I would always carry the shadow of loss. But each time, hope was stronger. It whispered to me through the kindness of strangers, the support of friends, the calls from my son. And through that whisper, I learned something vital. Hope is an act of courage. It is choosing to believe in better, even when the path is unclear. I began to plan for the future not with fear, but with curiosity. What new experiences might I find? What new friendships could I build? What parts of myself had I yet to discover? I allowed myself to dream small dreams first. A weekend trip to the coast, a painting class to try new techniques, joining a book club to meet others who shared my love of stories. Each small step forward was a victory. I also began to rebuild my relationship with Ethan and Lily in new ways. We no longer shared the same space daily, but we shared respect. We shared understanding. We shared love. Our conversations were honest, sometimes difficult, but always kind. I learned that relationships, like people, evolve. They change shape but do not disappear. Hope showed me that I could hold space for both grief and joy, that it was possible to remember the past without being trapped by it, to love deeply without losing myself, and to be vulnerable without fear. Sometimes, strength is quiet. It's the courage to open your heart after it's been broken, the choice to trust again after you've been hurt, the willingness to move forward, even when the future is uncertain. I found that strength in myself, not because I was unbreakable, but because I was willing to keep going, to keep loving, to keep hoping. Looking ahead, I don't know what the coming years will bring. There may be challenges. There may be unexpected turns. But I am ready, because I have learned that home is not just a place. It is the feeling of belonging within yourself. And that is something no one can take away. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that has passed, I feel a calm I did not expect. The journey was not easy. There were moments of sadness, doubt, and quiet fear. But there were also moments of deep learning, unexpected joy, and healing. I've come to understand that life is full of changes. Some we choose, others we don't. But no matter what shifts around us, the most important thing is to hold on to who we are inside, to find strength in our own hearts, to love without conditions, to forgive with grace, and to embrace the unknown with hope. If there's one thing I want to leave with you, it's this. Family isn't always perfect. It isn't always easy, but love, true love, is patient and kind. It adapts, it grows, and it survives even the quietest storms. Sometimes love means stepping back, giving space, and trusting that bonds will stretch, not break. Sometimes love means listening to hard truths and choosing to understand rather than judge. And sometimes love means loving yourself enough to start anew. Thank you for listening to my story. If this touched you, or if you've faced something similar, know you are not alone. I hope my experience gives you a little comfort, a little courage, and a reminder that healing is possible. Please take a moment to share your thoughts or stories in the comments below. Let's build a community where we can listen, support, and grow together. And if you want to hear more stories like this, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell so we can continue this journey side by side. From my heart to yours, thank you. Take care, and remember, every ending holds a new beginning.